The Indomitable's bridge fell silent as Captain Chen replayed the message for her senior staff. The alien's holographic form, a being with translucent blue skin and eyes that seemed to hold galaxies within them, flickered slightly above the command table. The Vorthak Dominion has conquered 32 systems in the past solar cycle, the alien admiral continued. Our technological superiority has proven insufficient against their numbers and determination. Intelligence suggests that human adaptability may provide tactical advantages we currently lack. Commander Jackson leaned forward, his weathered face illuminated by the hologram's glow. They're desperate. Question is, why should we get involved in someone else's war? Chen tapped her console, bringing up the star chart the Alliance had included with their message. She highlighted a particular vector with a swipe of her finger. Because the Vorthak expansion trajectory puts them at Earth's doorstep within 5 years. Better to fight them alongside allies than alone. Dr. Rice, the ship's xenobiologist, studied the biological data on the various Alliance species. Fascinating. Some of these civilizations have been spacefaring for millennia. Yet they're reaching out to us, barely a century into our interstellar phase. Pride comes before the fall. Lieutenant Commander Okafor, tactical officer, quoted as she analyzed the battle footage. Look at their formations. Perfect, predictable. They fight like it's a ballet, not a war. She zoomed in on an Alliance cruiser being torn apart by Vorthak weapons. They value precision over survival. Chen walked slowly around the holographic display, studying the Alliance and Vorthak ships. The Alliance vessels were elegant, almost artistic in their design, all flowing lines and harmonious proportions. The Vorthak ships were equally beautiful, but in a sharper, more aggressive fashion. Both made the Indomitable, with its practical angles and exposed heat sinks, look primitive by comparison. They've engineered out chaos, Chen said softly. Both sides. They've forgotten that survival isn't clean or pretty. She looked up at her crew. Humanity crawled out of the mud fighting for every breath. Our history is written in blood and desperate innovations. That's what they need. What they've lost. The ship's AI, RT-MAS, projected casualty estimates onto the main screen. Based on Alliance data, I estimate an 83% probability that humanity will face extinction if the Vorthak reach our sector without Alliance support. And our chances if we join them? Asked Jackson. Insufficient data, RT-MAS replied. Human tactical approaches are not represented in Alliance models. Chen nodded, decision made. She straightened her uniform and faced her crew. Send word to Earth Command. The Indomitable accepts the mission. She turned to her navigation officer. Lieutenant Kim, plot a course to these coordinates. Chief Engineer Gupta, I want our FTL drive pushed to its limits. Get us there ahead of schedule. That'll be our first lesson to the Alliance. Captain, Okafor interjected. Regulations state that first contact scenarios require a diplomatic team and. Chen cut her off with a raised hand. This isn't first contact, Lieutenant. This is an alliance of necessity. Her eyes hardened as she looked at the dying Alliance ships in the footage. And our first diplomatic statement will be showing them how humans fight when everything is on the line. As the Indomitable prepared to depart, Chen retreated to her quarters. She pulled out an old, worn book, Sun Tzu's Art of War, from her personal effects. A relic in a digital age, but she found comfort in its physical presence, in the knowledge that human understanding of conflict had deep roots. All warfare is based on deception, she read aloud to herself. Her lips curved into a small smile. The Alliance was about to learn just how deceptive humans could be. The Alliance docking bay was a marvel of engineering that made the Indomitable look like a relic. Crystalline support structures held vessels in gravitational suspension, with no visible moorings or cables. Captain Chen led her delegation across the impossibly smooth floor, aware of the stares from various alien species. Their environmental suits are made of fabric, whispered one technician, their voice translator not quite quiet enough. Commander Jackson resisted the urge to explain that humans preferred mobility over perfect protection. The Alliance approach to safety, like everything else they'd seen, prioritized eliminating all variables, all chaos. An Alliance diplomat, a tall, willowy being with skin like polished amber, approached with a formal bow. "I am Protocol Officer Ilanitar. The High Command awaits you in the Celestial Chamber." Her expression remained neutral, but her 4 eyes repeatedly darted to the visible sidearms carried by Chen's security team. "We can disarm if it would make your people more comfortable," Chen offered. Ilanitar's translator hesitated before responding. "That would not be necessary, though we find it curious that you rely on such primitive personal weapons." Lieutenant Reyes, walking just behind Chen, whispered. Translation: "They can't believe we trust something as unreliable as a physical projectile." The Celestial Chamber lived up to its name. The ceiling displayed a real-time view of surrounding space, while the walls shifted between different star systems. Seated in a semicircle were the representatives of the Alliance's ruling species. "The human vessel has arrived ahead of projected schedule," announced Admiral Zexalar. "Their propulsion systems exceeded our calculations. Our engines are designed with significant safety margin overrides," Chen explained as her team took their assigned seats. "In emergency situations, we can push beyond standard parameters." This statement caused a ripple of discomfort through the alien delegates. A crystalline being, Technical Officer Vrenkel, leaned forward, facets catching the light. "You deliberately operate equipment beyond safety specifications. How do you prevent catastrophic failures?" "Sometimes we don't," Chen replied honestly. "We accept the risk." The silence that followed was profound. Military strategist Clarath, a massive entity with scarred chitinous plating, broke the tension. "We have reviewed your vessel's defensive capabilities. They are inadequate for frontline engagement with Vorthak forces." Chen nodded. "By your metrics, certainly. But perhaps the Indomitable offers something beyond shield strength and weapon yield." "Such as?" Clarath challenged. "Unpredictability," Chen replied. "Your battle records show perfect formations, textbook maneuvers. The Vorthak have clearly adapted to your tactics." Another uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. Admiral Zexalar's scales rippled in what Jackson recognized as agitation. "You suggest our military doctrine is flawed?" asked a being composed of swirling gases contained within a humanoid force field. "I suggest it's predictable," Chen clarified. "War isn't about perfection, it's about adaptation." Later, in private quarters assigned to the human delegation, Chen's team processed their observations. The rooms were elegant but sterile, with environmental controls that constantly adjusted to maintain perfect homeostasis. "Did you notice they never interrupt each other?" Jackson said, loosening his collar. "Their conversations follow precise patterns. Even their arguments are structured." Reyes nodded. "Their entire civilization is built around eliminating randomness. It's beautiful, but terrible for warfare," Chen finished. "They've engineered out the very instincts that might save them." She pulled up footage of Vorthak attacks on her tablet. "Look, the Vorthak exploit this predictability. They don't just know what the Alliance will do. They know when and how they'll do it." "So what's our play, Captain?" asked Security Chief Diaz, cleaning her sidearm on the pristine table. Chen's eyes reflected the tactical display. "We show them the advantage of chaos." The simulation chamber was unlike anything the humans had seen before. A vast space where solid light constructs created perfect replicas of warships in space conditions. Captain Chen stood on the bridge of a simulated Indomitable, while her crew manned their stations, each wearing neural interface crowns that connected them to the system. "Scenario 17 Alpha will commence in 30 seconds, announced the emotionless voice of the Alliance testing AI. "Standard evasive response is expected against multiple Vorthak destroyers." Chen exchanged glances with Commander Jackson. They had reviewed the standard response in the briefing materials, a textbook retreat pattern designed to minimize damage while withdrawing to a more advantageous position. It was logical, mathematically optimal, and utterly predictable. Tactical. Arm all forward batteries, Chen ordered, causing several monitoring Alliance officers to look up from their consoles in confusion. Navigation. Plot an intercept course to the lead Vorthak vessel. Captain, came the voice of Science Officer T. Lara from the observation deck. That approach contradicts optimal evasion protocols. Noted, Chen replied simply as the simulation began. 5 Vorthak destroyers materialized before them, their blade-like forms gleaming with weapon ports already charging. In the standard Alliance response, ships would split formation and retreat along calculated vectors that distributed enemy fire most efficiently. Instead, the Indomitable surged forward directly toward the center vessel. Full power to forward shields, Chen commanded. Tactical. Target their primary weapon nodes and prepare to fire at point-blank range. The Alliance observers watched in horror as the human ship deliberately closed distance with a superior force. What they couldn't see was Lieutenant Commander Okuffer's analysis, rapidly overlaid on Chen's tactical display. The Vorthak ship's weapons took 3.7 seconds to complete their firing sequence, creating a brief vulnerability when energy was diverted from shields. Fire. Chen ordered the instant they crossed that threshold. The Indomitable's missiles launched at a range so close that even the simulated Vorthak AI couldn't adjust in time. Simultaneously, Chen ordered a barrel roll maneuver that no Alliance captain would ever attempt, exposing the ship's belly momentarily, but allowing all lateral weapons to fire in succession as they rotated. The lead Vorthak ship's simulated destruction caused a cascade of alert signals across the testing chamber. The simulation hadn't been programmed to account for this approach. Impossible, muttered Technical Officer Vrenkel, their crystalline form catching the light of warning indicators. The mathematical models clearly indicated. Math doesn't win wars. Chen interrupted as her crew executed a series of maneuvers that looked chaotic, but systematically picked apart the remaining enemy formation. Fighting spirit does. When the simulation ended, the Indomitable had sustained damage that would have been unacceptable by Alliance standards, but all 5 enemy vessels were neutralized. Science Officer T. Lara approached Chen afterward, her multifaceted eyes blinking in rapid sequence, an indication of intense thought. Chen had learned. Your tactics prioritized offensive success over crew survival probability, she stated. This contradicts all Alliance combat philosophy. Sometimes you have to risk everything to win, Chen replied. My crew understands that. And they accept this. Chen smiled. They expect it. Humans don't join starship crews for safety. Later, as medical staff monitored human biological responses to successive testing scenarios, T. Lara made a discovery that she immediately brought to Admiral Zexalar. Their neural patterns during crisis situations, she explained, displaying comparative brain scans. Where our species show diminished cognitive function under extreme stress, humans show enhanced pattern recognition and reaction time. They don't just tolerate chaos, they function better within it. Admiral Zexalar studied the data, his ancient eyes narrowing. You're suggesting we've been fighting incorrectly all this time. I'm suggesting, T. Lara replied carefully, that there may be advantages to controlled chaos that our civilization has engineered away. The humans call it getting their blood pumping. It appears to be an evolutionary advantage we no longer possess. Zexalar watched through the observation window as Captain Chen and her crew celebrated their simulation victory with physical contact. High fives according to the cultural database. Prepare additional test scenarios, he ordered. Let's see just how far this human chaos can take us. The alarms caught everyone off guard. Captain Chen was in the middle of explaining Earth's historical naval tactics to a group of fascinated Alliance officers when the station's lighting shifted to a deep crimson. Vorthak fleet detected in Sector 7, announced the station eye with unsettling calm. Estimate 17 warships. Early warning system breach confirmed. The Alliance officers froze momentarily. An instant of collective shock that Chen found more disturbing than the alarm itself. Commander Jackson was already at her side, communicator in hand. "Indomitable is ready for immediate launch, Captain," he reported. "Engineer Gupta reports the port thrusters are still at 70% capacity after yesterday's tests. But we'll manage," Chen interrupted, already moving toward the docking bay. She turned to the Alliance officers. "Is there a response protocol?" Senior Officer Chlorath seemed to recover his composure. "Formation Delta 9 is standard for unexpected incursions. All vessels will assume defensive positions around the station while they'll be expecting that," Chen cut in. Her mind raced through the data they'd studied about Vorthak attack patterns. "Your formations are in their tactical database. You need to do something they haven't simulated." Alarms continued blaring as they reached the command center. On the main display, Alliance vessels were already moving into their predetermined defensive positions. Elegant, mathematically optimal, and completely predictable. Admiral Zexlar stood rigidly before the tactical display. "Captain Chen, your vessel should remain docked. Its defensive capabilities are insufficient for this engagement." "With respect, Admiral, the Indomitable may be the only ship that can make a difference today." Chen nodded to Jackson, who was already relaying launch orders to their crew. "The Vorthak expect your standard response. Give me tactical command of a strike team, just 3 of your faster vessels, and we'll hit them from an unexpected vector." "Impossible," Technical Officer Vrenkel interjected. "Coordinated maneuvers require matched navigation protocols. Your systems are incompatible with." "We don't need fancy interfaces," Chen said, her voice sharp with urgency. "We need chaos." For a moment, Admiral Zexlar seemed caught between centuries of military doctrine and the desperate need for something different. Finally, he nodded. "Cruiser Starlight. Precision and harmony will follow your lead. But how will you coordinate when our communication networks are inevitably jammed?" Chen smiled grimly. "The oldest method in the book." 15 minutes later, the Indomitable launched with 3 Alliance cruisers in loose formation. As predicted, the moment the Vorthak fleet engaged, all standard communication channels went dead. Quantum entanglement, subspace transmission, even directed tight beam signals were somehow blocked. "They've been studying Alliance communication for years," Shen said as her bridge crew worked furiously to implement her plan. "But not ours." The Indomitable's engines began pulsing in what appeared to be irregular bursts. To an untrained observer, it might have seemed like damage or malfunction. To the Alliance captains who had been hastily briefed, it was a revelation. Morse code, a binary communication system so primitive that Vorthak jamming technology didn't even register it. "Port thrusters failing," reported Engineer Gupta over the ship's intercom. "We can't maintain standard evasive patterns." "Good," Chen replied, to the engineer's evident confusion. "Let them think we're crippled. Tactical, are all weapons charged?" Lieutenant Commander Okafor nodded, understanding dawning on her face. "Plain possum, Captain. An old Earth hunting technique," Chen confirmed as the Indomitable began drifting, seemingly damaged, directly into the path of the Vorthak formation. Sometimes the best predators pretend to be prey. On the Alliance command station, Admiral Zexlar watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as the human vessel appeared to lose control, tumbling toward the enemy fleet, while the 3 Alliance cruisers adjusted their positions in what seemed like a desperate rescue attempt. "What are they doing?" Vrenkel demanded. "This is madness." Science Officer T. Lara, however, was beginning to understand. "No," she whispered. "This is human chaos." The Indomitable's repair bay hummed with activity as Alliance and human engineers worked side by side. Sparks cascaded from welding seams, illuminating the unusual sight of crystalline beings and humans collaborating on systems that were never designed to interact. Captain Chen walked through the organized chaos, noting how the rigid Alliance protocols were gradually giving way to more flexible approaches as the 2 groups found common ground. "We've adapted your shield harmonics to our power distribution network," explained Engineer Gupta, pointing to a schematic floating in holographic space between them. It won't be as elegant as your systems, but it should provide 40% more protection than our standard configuration. Technical Officer Vrenkel's crystalline features shifted in what Chen had come to recognize as reluctant admiration. Your power conduits are crude, but the redundancy is remarkably effective. When one pathway fails, you simply reroute through another. That's the human way, Chen replied. We build in backup systems, manual overrides, and multiple failure points because we expect things to go wrong. Vrenkel contemplated this. The Alliance designs to prevent failure. You design to survive it. In another section of the station, Commander Jackson was leading a tactical analysis session with a mixed group of human and Alliance officers. The room's walls displayed battle footage from the recent engagement, with the Indomitable's unexpected maneuvers highlighted in contrast to the Vorthak's responses. They reacted 7 seconds slower to our course change than to the Alliance vessels, Jackson explained, freezing the footage at a crucial moment. That may not sound like much, but in space combat, it's an eternity. Captain Drelvac of the Harmony leaned forward, his four-fingered hand tracing the trajectory, because they couldn't predict your movements using their tactical models. Exactly, Jackson confirmed. Their entire strategy relies on predicting your responses. When we do something they consider irrational, it forces them to actually think rather than rely on programmed responses. Science Officer T. Lara had been unusually quiet during the session. Finally, she spoke. I have been analyzing human decision-making patterns since your arrival. There is something different about how you process risk. She gestured, and a new display appeared showing comparative neural pathways. Alliance species evolved toward certainty and pattern. Even our genetic modifications over millennia have reinforced this tendency. But humans, she highlighted a particular cluster of brain activity. You actually experience neurochemical rewards when taking calculated risks. Jackson laughed. We call it an adrenaline rush. Some humans seek it out deliberately. The Alliance officers looked horrified at the concept. Meanwhile, in the station's central archives, Captain Chen had been granted unprecedented access to historical battle records. She sat amidst floating data streams, with Lieutenant Rice helping her categorize thousands of years of combat data. I've identified something, Rice said suddenly. Look at the Vorthak fleet movements across multiple engagements. She gestured, collapsing hundreds of battle maps into a composite overlay. Their formations aren't just tactical, they're aesthetic. Chen studied the pattern that emerged. They're creating geometric perfection. Even their attack vectors form symmetrical patterns when viewed from the right perspective. A slow smile spread across her face. They're not just fighting for victory. They're fighting for beauty. Which means they might sacrifice tactical advantage to maintain pattern, Rice concluded. Chen nodded, already formulating a plan. If we deliberately create asymmetry, ugly, chaotic patterns that disrupt their sense of order, we might force them into mistakes. When Admiral Zexlar arrived to check on their progress, he found Chen surrounded by battle simulations that looked nothing like Alliance tactical displays. Instead of elegant formations and clean engagement vectors, she had created swirling, seemingly random patterns that nonetheless revealed deadly efficiency when played forward. What is this? He asked, ancient eyes widening at the display. Chen looked up, determination clear on her face. This, Admiral, is the art of ugly warfare, and it's exactly what the Alliance needs right now. The Alliance Grand Council chamber had never witnessed such a contentious debate. Fleet Commander Xanthar's war tendrils were fully extended in agitation as he faced down Admiral Zexlar and Captain Chen. Operation Chaos violates 17 established tactical doctrines, Xanthar protested, his voice resonating through the crystalline chamber. Our formations have been refined over millennia of warfare, and the Vorthak have spent those same millennia learning to counter them, Chen replied calmly. She stood before the holographic battle plan, its deliberately asymmetrical patterns glowing in sharp contrast to the geometric perfection of the chamber itself. Your doctrines are beautiful, logical, and utterly predictable. Admiral Zexelar's scales shifted in subtle support of Chen's position. The human vessel and its 3 escort ships inflicted disproportionate damage against superior Vorthak forces by employing tactics outside our established parameters. Through luck, Xanthar countered. Through chaos, Chen corrected. Controlled, deliberate chaos. Science Officer T. Lara stepped forward, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the battle simulations. I have analyzed the Vorthak response patterns across 200 engagements. They demonstrate a clear preference for symmetrical combat formations, often sacrificing tactical advantage to maintain aesthetic harmony. The chamber fell silent as Chen manipulated the holographic display. Our plan targets this psychological weakness. We've modified 8 volunteer Alliance vessels with human-inspired systems, randomized energy signatures, deliberately asymmetrical shield configurations, and communications protocols that appear erratic, but follow an encrypted pattern only we can interpret. You propose to make our finest ships ugly? Asked one council member, the concept clearly disturbing. I propose to make them unpredictable, Chen replied. And yes, aesthetically offensive to Vorthak sensibilities. As the council deliberated, Commander Jackson led the volunteer Alliance captains through final briefings aboard the Indomitable. The ship's mess hall had been converted into a strategy room, with tactical displays showing the unusual formations they would employ. Your vessels will need to maintain these precise distances, Jackson explained, highlighting irregular spacing between ships. To the Vorthak, it will appear random and chaotic, but there's method to our madness. Captain Drelvac of the Harmony studied the patterns with growing understanding. Like your Earth game of chess, sacrificing pieces in seemingly illogical ways to create unexpected advantages. Exactly, Jackson confirmed. And like chess, timing is everything. Engineer Gupta entered with several Alliance technicians, carrying modified communication devices. The pulse transmitters are ready. They'll emit what appears to be radiation leakage but contains embedded command signals. The Vorthak will register them as battle damage, not communications. Back in the council chamber, the vote was completed. Operation Chaos was approved by the narrowest of margins. Admiral Zexelar approached Chen as the council members dispersed. Half of them think you're leading us to disaster, he said quietly. The other half believe you might be our last hope. And you, Admiral? Chen asked. Zexelar's ancient eyes studied her for a long moment. I have commanded fleets for 300 cycles. I have seen civilizations rise and fall. And never, in all that time, have I witnessed a species that thrives on uncertainty the way humans do. He gestured to the battle plan. This approach contradicts everything our civilization values: order, predictability, harmony. Yet perhaps that is precisely why it might succeed. As the strike force prepared for departure, the Indomitable's crew made final modifications to their ship. Lieutenant Commander Okafor supervised his technicians installed specialized devices on the hull. Harmonic disruptors, she explained to a curious Alliance engineer. They'll project energy fields that interfere with the Vorthak's sensor harmonics, not enough to blind them completely, but enough to make their readings slightly wrong. A small discrepancy, the engineer noted. Okafor smiled grimly. In space combat, being off by even 1 degree can mean the difference between hit and miss. We're not trying to break their systems, just introduce enough doubt to force them to question their calculations. As the final launch preparations commenced, Captain Chen addressed the combined human and Alliance crews through a shared communication channel. Today, we bring chaos to an enemy that worships order. Our formation will be ugly. Our maneuvers will be unpredictable. Our victory will be messy. She paused, looking at the determined faces of her crew. And that is exactly why we will succeed. News of Operation Chaos's success spread through the Alliance like wildfire. The strike force had returned triumphant, having destroyed the Vorthak antimatter facility with minimal losses. More remarkably, Intercepted Vorthak communications revealed unprecedented confusion in their command structure. Their tactical responses had grown increasingly erratic as they struggled to impose order on the deliberately chaotic Alliance formations. In the Alliance Central Academy, a most unusual scene unfolded. Lieutenant Reyes stood before a class of young Alliance officers from 17 species, conducting what she called chaos training. "Predictability is death," she explained, as the trainees attempted to follow her seemingly random movement patterns. "Your entire lives, you've been taught that order brings strength. In warfare, it often brings vulnerability." One trainee, a young Venchi with iridescent scales, raised a tentative hand. "But how do we coordinate if each vessel moves unpredictably?" "By understanding the pattern beneath the chaos," Reyes answered, manipulating a tactical display to reveal the hidden structure underlying the apparently random movements. "True chaos has no pattern. What we create is controlled unpredictability, comprehensible to us, incomprehensible to the enemy." Throughout the Alliance fleet, transformations were underway. Engineers modified communication systems to include human-inspired redundancies. Tactical officers practiced response patterns that deliberately varied from engagement to engagement. Even Alliance vessel design was being reconsidered, with asymmetrical configurations being tested for the first time in millennia. On the Indomitable, Captain Chen met with Admiral Zexalar and the newly formed Joint Command Staff. Their victory had been significant, but intelligence reports suggested the Vorthak were preparing a devastating response. "Our sources indicate they're mobilizing their supreme weapon," Zexalar announced gravely. "The reality fracture." The Alliance officers grew still. Even Chen, accustomed to the Admiral's usual stoicism, could sense the dread in the room. "I take it this isn't just another big gun," she said carefully. Science Officer T. Lara activated a holographic display. "The reality fracture manipulates quantum probability fields to ensure mathematical perfection in battle conditions. It creates a zone where variance and unpredictability are suppressed, where chaos itself becomes impossible. It enforces order," Chen translated, understanding immediately the threat to their strategy. "Precisely," T. Lara confirmed. "Within its influence, ships move exactly as quantum calculations predict they should. Weapons fire with perfect accuracy. Even random system failures become mathematically predictable." Commander Jackson studied the data with growing concern. "It negates our entire advantage." In all previous encounters with the reality fracture, Alliance forces had no choice but to retreat. Admiral Zexalar explained, "No strategy can succeed when the enemy can predict every move with perfect accuracy." Chen was quiet for a long moment, considering implications. "This weapon enforces predictability through quantum manipulation," she finally said. "What's the most fundamentally unpredictable quantum system we know of?" T. Lara's multifaceted eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Conscious decision-making, particularly human consciousness, which our studies show has unique properties of quantum indeterminacy." "Are you suggesting," Zexalar asked slowly, "that human minds might resist the reality fracture's effects?" "I'm suggesting more than that," Chen replied, a plan already forming. "The Indomitable's experimental fusion drive operates on quantum uncertainty principles. If we modified it to amplify rather than stabilize those fluctuations, you would create a bubble of pure quantum chaos," T. Lara completed, excitement overcoming her usual reserve. "A space where the reality fracture cannot impose its mathematical certainty. The consequences would be unpredictable," warned Chief Engineer Gupta, who had been listening silently. "We'd be delving into theoretical physics that even Earth's best minds have only speculated about." "Unpredictable is exactly what we need," Chen said firmly. As the implications of her plan sank in around the table, she added more softly, "Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, or in this case, fight order with chaos." On the observation deck, Admiral Zexalar watched as Alliance officers and human crew members gathered for an impromptu celebration, sharing food, stories, and even teaching each other cultural games. He turned to Chen, who had joined him. "In all my centuries," he said quietly, "I never imagined our salvation would come in the form of beautiful disorder." The Helios Nebula shimmered with streams of ionized gas and newborn stars, a naturally chaotic region where quantum fluctuations occurred spontaneously. It was here, amid this cosmic disorder, that the final confrontation would unfold. The Indomitable, now barely recognizable with its hybrid of human and Alliance technology, led the combined fleet into position. On the bridge, Captain Chen studied the tactical display as final preparations were completed. The modified fusion drive hummed with an unsettling resonance that seemed to blur the edges of reality itself. "Quantum amplification system is online," reported Engineer Gupta, her voice betraying a mix of pride and apprehension. "We're creating a field of probability uncertainty that extends approximately 2 kilometers from the hull." Commander Jackson nodded toward the viewport where the Alliance vessels had taken positions, not in their traditional perfect formations, but in deliberately irregular patterns designed by both human and Alliance tacticians. "The volunteer ships are in position," he confirmed. "Their crews have been briefed on what to expect, or rather, what not to expect, which is predictability." Chen finished with a grim smile. She opened a channel to the fleet. "All vessels, maintain your positions within the nebula's ionization currents. Remember your training. Embrace the chaos." Science Officer T. Lara, who had insisted on joining the Indomitable for this mission, monitored the quantum readings with fascination. The nebula's natural fluctuations are already interfering with long-range sensors. The Vorthak will need to come closer than they prefer. Long-range sensors detected the approaching Vorthak fleet, a perfect geometric formation of warships surrounding a central vessel that pulsed with unnatural regularity. The reality fracture. Admiral Zexlar identified from his position on the Alliance flagship. It's already beginning to stabilize quantum fields at the edge of the nebula. Throughout the Alliance fleet, crews felt the effect, a subtle sensation of increased order, as if the universe itself were becoming more predictable. Instrument readings steadied, random fluctuations diminished, and the nebula's swirling gases began to move in more regular patterns. On the Indomitable, however, something different was happening. As the reality fracture's influence reached them, the human crew reported a strange clarity of thought, as if their minds were automatically compensating for the imposed order. Consciousness pushing back against constraint. T. Lara murmured, monitoring their neural patterns. "Fascinating." Chen felt it too, a heightened awareness, instincts sharpening rather than dulling under the weapon's influence. "Activate the quantum drive modification," she ordered. "Let's show them what happens when you try to cage chaos." Engineer Gupta initiated the sequence, and the Indomitable's modified drive began to pulse with increasing intensity. The ship itself seemed to blur at the edges, existing in multiple potential states simultaneously. "Reality fracture is attempting to stabilize our position," reported the tactical officer, her voice oddly doubled as if coming from slightly different versions of herself. "But our uncertainty field is creating a feedback loop in their systems." Alliance ships following in the Indomitable's wake reported similar effects, the human-designed modifications on their vessels creating bubbles of unpredictability that the reality fracture couldn't resolve. The Vorthak fleet's perfect formation began to waver as their systems struggled to process conflicting data. Their flagship, housing the reality fracture, intensified its output, desperately trying to impose order on the escalating chaos. "They're overloading the system," T. Lara warned, her instruments showing dangerous energy spikes. The reality fracture wasn't designed to handle this level of quantum feedback. "That's the plan," Chen confirmed, ordering the fleet to advance. Sometimes fighting fire with fire means being willing to get burned. As the Indomitable led the charge directly toward the heart of the enemy fleet, multiple probability shadows trailed behind it. Echoes of alternate tactical choices, all equally valid, all equally real within their quantum bubble. The Vorthak targeting systems failed catastrophically, unable to determine which version of the human ship was the true target. In the command center of the Vorthak flagship, The supreme aesthetic watched in growing horror as perfect order dissolved into incomprehensible possibilities. For the first time in the history of their civilization, they faced an enemy whose strength came not from technological superiority, but from embracing the very chaos they had spent millennia trying to eliminate.